Alright, so here I've assembled a little selection of plants that I've either taken cuttings last year or plants that I've been overwintering for even a couple of years. What I tend to do is keep at least one mature stock plant over the winter in the greenhouse, just so that I have a little bit of a reserve in case I have any difficulty with getting the cuttings to strike root if I'm doing them in the fall. Certain plants are not going to be worth doing much more than taking a couple cuttings off of now in the spring, or in a couple cases possibly just tossing away, because I've had all winter to grow on some better specimens that are going to perform a little bit better. Certain plants, on the other hand, I will definitely be keeping. So here is an example of a nice little cutting of Pelargonium bird dancer. This is a nice little plant in a 2 1/4 inch pot. Great starter plant. It's going to grow really, really well this year. But the parent plant from last year is also going to get a chance to shine again this year. It's a nice, compact growing dwarf plant. Nothing wrong with how bushy it is. Nice, well branched and fairly even, already flowering well. So I could take a few cuttings off of this one should I need more backup, or a plant like this can just go out into the garden for display. Here I have an example of something that I really kept as just a backup. This plant is Pelargonium Chiltern Beauty. I have a nice collection of these in the garden already from cuttings done last summer. I have really no need to do anything with this one, and as you can sort of see, it's only producing at most some very tiny little offshoot growths. Growths like this aren't going to make great cuttings for you, especially off of a plant that's so vigorous as this one is. So this one is probably going to be destined for the compost bin fairly soon, just because it doesn't have a lot of vigor going for it, and it's going to be a fairly woody and rangy looking plant this year. Here we've got a plant of Pelargonium platinum. This is a sport of Pelargonium Frank Headley. This one has been cut back. You can sort of make out at most of the top growths. I've taken cuttings off of it quite recently, but it's already starting to bush out and branch quite well at all the nodes. It's a fairly robust plant already, and if I give this one a chance this year, it's probably going to grow quite well. All of the new growth that's coming seems quite vigorous, so this one will get to stay. Here we see good old Pelargonium Mrs. Pollock. This is a cutting that was done last year. Nice and vigorous. I've already bedded a bunch of these out into the front garden. This is going to grow into a nice large bushy plant. I've kept this other plant as a backup for a couple of years now, and it's given me quite a number of cuttings. But I would say now we're at the point where it's not really producing anything too big and vigorous. It's producing lots of very small growth. Probably time for this one to retire and live on in the other cuttings that have been done. Here's a slightly different one. We have Pelargonium Pink Happy Thought, the pink sport of a happy thought. This plant I did keep mostly just to get cuttings off of. It was one that I acquired fairly recently, just in the last couple of years, and I'm trying to build up the stock of it. Here you can see I've taken quite a number of cuttings off of it already, over from last summer all the way through to this spring. I think I'm going to end up taking probably my last 3 cuttings off and retiring this one as well. But you can see it's got nice longer stems right in here. This is sort of a prime area to do cuttings from. We're okay. The areas where the green is starting to meet something woody, it's still fairly fresh, so we can take some cuttings right up here. So just with nice clean secateurs, we'll just go right below a node, and that will become a cutting that we can prepare and pot up. And from looking at this one, we should be able to get a total of 3 more off of this plant. There's another one down here. Fairly nice cutting there. And this one's going to be a bit on the small side, but well worth a try. It is the warmer part of spring now, so I do have a little bit of a chance with something like that. In our next video, I'll just show you how to get these prepared and potted up. Unfortunately, the last little branch with a flower here is far too small to do very much of anything with. So that one will be onto the great compost bin in the sky. The scented pelargoniums, this is Pelargonium capitatum pink champagne. This one I took cuttings from probably a couple months ago after it had started growing out in the spring. It's now bushing out quite a bit. Something like this I will definitely keep for this summer's growing season. A plant like this is going to be quite big and bushy. It'll fill out, start to trail and ramble, and produce lots of flowers. So that's definitely a keeper the way it's growing. And then here's an interesting little combo. We have a cutting from last summer of Frank Headley. We have two stock plants that I had kept. One of them I've taken quite a few cuttings off of. The other I've let go a little bit more rangy. This is what you really want to be planting out in your flower beds and in your planters this spring. It's going to be a nice little plant. It's going to fill out and grow really big through the summer and give you lots of flowers and be nice and lush and green. This one is still of a size where I can take a few cuttings. It's also interesting to note that it has produced an all-green sport. Normally we're going to select for these nicer leaves. In these instances, I sometimes will grow the green sport on just for a year or two to see what it does. A few of them have actually proven to be really nice plants. They don't have quite the same show value as the variegated foliage would, but I've got, for instance, a green reversion of Crystal Palace Gem that grows to about 3 foot tall and forms almost a hedge, so it's well worth keeping as well. So in this instance, I might just take this little cutting and grow it on, just noting what it is, that it's a green sport. And then of what's left in this pot, really most of them are quite small stems. I have quite a lot of this plant, so I'm just going to take this one last cutting that was the only one really long enough in there to bother with. On the taller, rangier plant here, it looks like there could be a ton of cuttings, and it all depends on how much you really need. For something like this taller one here, there's actually a little node just above this side branch, so I can take a cutting there, giving me one nice cutting. There are a couple of nodes here after a side branch, so I can take that as another cutting. And I could keep going further and further down the stem here. This can be a really helpful way of doing cuttings, some of these little side branches. Just if you're really trying to bulk up a plant that you only have one or two of, you might only get 3 or 4 tip cuttings on a plant, but in an instance like this, you could get a lot of side branches. So in our next video, I'll show you how to prep the cuttings and how to put them all together.